And we're live here on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter per usual. What's up, guys? Nick here on the P2W podcast, kicking it off on November 10th, going into week 10. A lot of 10s in that picture there, but excited to talk about some mailbag questions today with Kevin on our usual segment. Kevin, before I ask you how things are going, there's been a lot of questions circulating if the beard's coming back or if this is the new look. So I don't know if you want to start off with that and then let us know what else is going on. But you have to answer this pressing question right now.
Yeah, I mean it'll come back. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. I needed a little bit of it makes me look younger. That's what I was told by my wife. But it'll come back. I needed a shave. My daughter wanted to shave my beard, so I let her, and so we just had some fun with it. But it'll come back in the winter. I get lazy, so it'll come back.
It's almost like the people do bulking season in the winter. You just like try something different.
Yeah.
It's that time of the year. A lot of hibernating going on as is, but yeah, we're rolling here, going into week 10, and I try to mix things up weekly here. You know, a lot of times we talk about reactions and starts and things like that, but I figured this week would be a cool mailbag week, and I know that sometimes it's kind of common for people to ask for mailbag questions and reach out to the community and sit there and answer them. But I like doing it because it hits on different topics. Plus, I think I like our perspectives and how we kind of complement each other on some thoughts weekly. So I think this should be a pretty decent episode there. So before we get into that, as always, this podcast is partnered up with the Fantasy Points Media Group, which is part of the Fantasy Points big brand just in general, which Kevin is now, said this before, part of, not just through this podcast, but also through Triple Play, the newest edition there. Fantasypoints.com, they are already, I think, 50% off for their subscription, and there's a lot of football left to go. Personally, I'm on there every day looking at advanced stats. I just looked at some red zone data. I think today, just looking at touchdown percentage in that area. They got articles, rankings, whatever you're looking for, it's all in one spot. So go check out fantasypoints.com/subscribe. You can get that 50% off, but you can also use my promo code 21win10 for an additional discount. Again, well worth it. And before we go into, I had a mini contest, Kevin. I was trying to get some engagement, some organic engagement. I said, "What is the basketball jersey I'm going to be wearing tonight?" I said it was going to be a sophomore, and it was kind of funny hearing some of the answers. Not knocking anybody because not everybody's the expert in all sports, but there were some answers like Luka Doncic and John Morant who are not necessarily sophomores. A lot of LaMelo balls, and I actually have a. It's hard to. Number 28 on the Pistons, Motor City. I got it. I'm a Chicago guy wearing a Pistons jersey. That's my guy, Isaiah Stewart. So not the most common jersey.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's some off the wall. I like to mix things up a little bit, but that's the jersey I rock. So I don't owe anybody a $10 Venmo, but I do appreciate the guesses that did come in. But if you are joining us again, Kevin and I are about to hit these mailbag questions. Should be a good episode here. Stick with us.
Play to win, no fear to give. I feel but I can't forgive. I go all in this time, yeah, I won't regret. I'll pick the best on trip, they don't understand. I play to win, yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Oh, play to win, I play to win. Yeah, I play to win, I play to win.
All right, so once again, mailbag episode. We got a lot of questions here. I think we'll hit on some good topics. So I actually got creative earlier. I did have some overlays. Let's see if they can pop up or not. If not, I just got them in front of me. Sometimes these things work out, sometimes they don't. But yeah, first one here on the list of questions. I do have it right here in the bottom. So jump right into things here. We got at Smokey Hell NFL, our guy Smokey. His question is, what do I do with Sanders and Gainwell from both redraft and Dino perspectives? So again, looking at the Eagles backfield, I know there's been a little bit of confusion the last few weeks on the touches and who was going to do what. Miles Sanders, I think, is geared up to come back at some point this season. So, Kevin, what's your thoughts on both Sanders and Gainwell for both redraft and dynasty leagues here? So short term and long term.
Yeah, this Eagles backfield is a mess to say the least in terms of just production. Like, what are we going to get from these guys? When is Sanders going to return? I mean, last week I looked at it. I actually started Jordan Howard in the league, and I felt like this was
Oh,
2019 all over again. I was like, wait a minute, like what's happening here? And hey, I had 17 carries, 71 yards, a touchdown. Could you imagine if they gave Miles Sanders 17 carries in a game? What maybe that would look like? It would be nice, right?
I saw like a TikTok. Not that I'm on TikTok too much, during work hours or anything like that. But I saw one of him, and it was somebody like doing the mouth voiceover, and he was just sitting on the sideline, like shocked that Jordan Howard was touching the ball that much, and he's like, "Why can't I do that?" But yeah, that's interesting.
No, I agree. And then like Boston Scott, 10 carries, 40 yards. Kenneth Gainwell only had 2 carries. He had a touchdown, but that was it. I mean, that saves, Gainwell people out there. And he had no targets. So I think like when you're looking at the backfield right now, as far as redraft goes, I just kind of stay away from both these guys, right? Like you can't until Sanders comes back and he's healthy. I would probably, unless you absolutely needed somebody else, I would keep Sanders on your roster for redraft, because if he does come back and they do give him the volume that they're giving some guy like Jordan Howard, then okay, he could do well for you. Gainwell in redraft, I'm kind of out on, to be honest, for right now. I mean, unless he absolutely shows that he can carry the workload, but that's 2 straight weeks now that we've seen him kind of get out touched, and that concerns me. I don't know how you can start him with confidence. I wouldn't cut him, but it's very close to where like, hey, you can't start him with confidence unless you're really, really struggling there.
Yeah, I think he's like right on the edge of being cut right now. I mean, if you want to stash him on the edge of your bench because you have the availability to do so, that's one thing. But at the same time, seeing the last 4 games, 1.1, 14.1, so that was decent, but he only had 9 touches in that game. Then 2.7 and 6.3. He touched the ball, like you said, twice last game. He might be borderline cut right now just because every game lately, he hasn't really been touching the ball enough. He can't be a flex play at all right now either.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we know that the running back position, the depth of that position is kind of scarce. So it's hard to have decent running backs with some depth in the redraft. But I think you mentioned Jordan Howard. I think the 29 carries the last 2 games gives you some hope for Miles Sanders that when he does get back to full health, maybe he can have some games like this. I'm hoping, I think he's hoping that he can also have some games like that. I actually picked up Miles Sanders in a keeper league that was dropped, and I'm just sitting him on the edge of my bench because of the running back position. But Dynasty's a little iffy. I think this offense is going to continue to shift and change and hopefully build. What's your thoughts? So Kenny Gainwell, I think a lot of people like the talent. They like the pass catching abilities. I think if you liked him in the rookie draft and you went out and bought him in your rookie draft for Dynasty, you're just holding him because you're not going to get much value for him. But what do you think about Miles Sanders long term? Do you have a lot of concerns for Miles Sanders? Is he just another guy you just hold for Dynasty? I feel like you can't really get much for him right now today.
Yeah, he has to be a hold, right? Like he's in a weird spot. I like Sanders, but I don't think the Eagles like him very much. So I just don't understand why that he gets to get the usage that he has. Hurts in that offense with what they're trying to accomplish. I mean, I think we talked about it, and as much as I don't think Nick Sirianni's a very good coach, they were talking about like, oh well, we call plays for Sanders, but then Hurts checked out of him 7 or 8 times on the RPOs or whatever. And so I think that's also concerning. Hurts is upside for the rushing once everybody likes him. And in Dynasty, you have to hold him. I think you just have to hold and hope, because like when you're looking at what he's gone for recently, it's not great. Like he got traded with Dawson Knox for Kenneth Gainwell and Robert Woods. Do you want Robert Woods and Gainwell? I mean, maybe. I don't know if I would actually give up Gainwell or Robert Woods for Sanders right now. Like it's a weird kind of in the middle. If you could get a guy like, if you could maybe pair up with a pick and get someone like Dobbins who's hurt, maybe, or something like that, like realistically, maybe go after guys like that. Okay. But even then, like I think if Sanders' values really dipped, and you have to hope that he can come back, and maybe he needs to find a new change of scenery to actually be good somewhere. But running backs are needed. He doesn't have a ton of volume on his legs, so he's going to be good at some point, somewhere, hopefully, and you just hope on that. But I think it's more of a hope than like it's going to happen.
Yeah, and the last thing, just to cap this off for Dynasty, I think trading and the timing of your trades are very important for long-term leagues. Now's not the time to trade guys that might have value later, or you saw had value in the past. when they're struggling or they're injured, because you're not going to get much for them unless you have a diehard guy that like still to this day loves Miles Sanders and holds him to the degree that he once was at, maybe in some leagues. It's not the time. So timing is everything when it comes to dynasty trading. So as far as what to do with them, you got to hold them right now. And if it ends up not being the greatest decision, it's probably better than selling him for a guy that's going to be on your bench as well. So decent question there, especially with the timing of what's going on with the Eagles. Next one on the list here, at SackX Sports, playing a league with him, Fantasy Disciples, I think, with Commissioner Breeze. Great league, great commissioner there. He says rank Najee, JT, Swift, Cook, Saquon, and CMC in Dynasty. So he's got a long list of names here, and we can really dive into each guy. But for the sake of the show and the sake of the rest of the questions, maybe we can just throw out our personal rankings, how we feel that they're, adding Dynasty before the season started versus right now. Very different. I think most people would say, Christian McCaffrey's at the top of the list, and then maybe Cook and Saquon are in there, and then JT's edging up. But a lot of things have changed from the start of the season until now, as far as injuries go, guys stepping up, shifting of how we actually view players. I know, Swift is a guy you and I were very high on before the season started. Not so much for the rest of the community, but people are kind of buying into him now. It's a good list here. I'm going to say most of these guys are probably pretty close, and there's not like these huge gaps in tiers or anything with them. But Kevin, what do you think here? If you had to just spit out a list and say today, November 10th, what does it look like?
This list is why I'm a zero running back guy, because this is, beginning of the year when you see this list and you're like, hey, of course it's these guys in front of them. And then now all of a sudden, 9-10 games in, you're like, wait, no, now it's JT. And I think Jonathan Taylor is the one. I think he's the clear cut, I think, running back one of that class. And after that, it gets kind of interesting. I'm going to go Swift as my running back too. I think that he's the dynasty running back too. I really, really believe in Swift and his talent. Then I'm going to go CMC. Then I'm going to go Najee, Saquon. And I'm going to put Cook last because I don't know what the F is going on with Cook. So I'm just going to leave that at the end and just say, hey, I don't know what's going on there with that legal stuff that he has. But I think Saquon comes in at the bottom too. He hasn't been able to stay healthy. I know he's super talented. I know injury prone is not a real thing. But to have production, you guys stay on the field, and so does CMC.
We got a lot of highs coming in on the chat. My sister-in-law, her friend that's probably with her right now. We had Nate earlier, so appreciate the Facebook and the YouTube streams, because we can actually see comments, and on Twitter for whatever reason still we can't see anything. But Kevin, you had JT 1?
JT 1, Swift, CMC, Najee, Saquon, and Cook.
All right, we're very close, because I had JT number 1 as well, and then I went McCaffrey, but I really wanted to say Swift, so I think we're pretty close there as well. I said JT, CMC, Swift, Najee, and then I had it flip Cook and Saquon, but I feel like the argument can be made for either one of those guys to be ahead of the other. So I think we're pretty close actually with these rankings. But if you look at the start of the season, a lot of people would not have had Deandre Swift at 2 or 3, and he's starting to be bought into being a top 5 guy. And I definitely think he's a top 3 guy, to seeing what he's done in the passing game and just the efficiency he's had this season. So we're very close with our rankings there. I think that's a good sign. I thought we were going to be all flipped around here. Next one on the list here, another set of rankings. This one's maybe it's a little bit tougher. Our guy, John McGlynn, at John McGlynn 75. He was just hanging out in my garage this past Sunday, having a couple beers, watching the game. It was a good time. He asks, rank these quarterbacks in Dynasty Superflex. So Superflex, if you're listening, you can start 2 quarterbacks in those leagues. So quarterbacks have higher values when it comes to that. But yes, Mac Jones, Tua, Danny Dimes, Zach Wilson, how we rank these guys. I'll spit out some rankings from some bigger sites here. So this is what some of the bigger sites say. I looked at Fantasy Points, obviously being under the brand, and then Fantasy Pros, just because they're one of the biggest brands as well. So Mac Jones, Fantasy Points has 19. Fantasy Pros has 21, so pretty close. Tua, Fantasy Points has 24, but Fantasy Pros has 16, so a little bit of a gap there. Danny Dimes, 15 on Fantasy Points, 25 on Fantasy Pros. Zach Wilson, 22 on fantasy points and 19 on fantasy pros. So I don't want you to rank, give me their exact number for you right now. We'll just say out of this list, where do you have everybody? And I'll start things off. And I'll be in the minority here, probably with my first, but I'm actually going to put Tua above the rest of these guys. And then I'm going to go Daniel Jones, Mac, and then Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson, I think has looked terrible in seeing the other two quarterbacks in. I think that, that's not the greatest of looks, but I think that he still will get better over time. But I think I've just seen better days out of these other three right now. And I wasn't super high on Zach Wilson to begin with, so that's why I have him as my last guy. Tua, I still have faith in because you know what? Before his last injury, he actually looked pretty good. He was having some nice games. He was doing well for fantasy. And he hasn't really had a healthy core in front of him this whole time. And Daniel Jones, I think, edges Mac for me just because of the usage with the legs right now. And I really want to see what they build around Mac Jones. But Mac Jones is an NFL passer, I think, has been pretty good for fantasy, though. It hasn't really equated to these huge fantasy weeks where he's, a top 5 guy in a given week or anything like that. So for me, Tua, Jones, Mac, and Wilson. But curious to hear yours, Kevin.
Yeah, so you and me are on lock with Tua. I had Tua as my one in this group too, just based on overall potential and talent. Like, I still believe in him. Can we both agree that he's been getting screwed by the Dolphins, like for how they haven't really built that team around him in the best spot. Their wide receiver crews just got hurt. That offensive line was pretty shaky. What they did last year with the whole Fitzpatrick thing and how they worked on that after the injury, he's got some confidence thing. Watson, right? So I still believe in Tua and his talent. So I put him 1 here because I think he has the highest ceiling of this class, of this group of guys right here. I don't necessarily agree with you on Daniel Jones, though. I don't think he's very good. And I do think he has a rushing upside, like you mentioned. Like, he's going to score fantasy points. But is this being dynasty? Do we realistically think that they're going to keep him around next year for sure? Like, do we know that for sure?
I don't know. Opening up the season, the first 4 weeks, he looked really good. And then the next couple of weeks after that, weeks 5 through 9, he didn't. He was in that 21 plus range. He had that 29 outing against the Washington football team. But then after that, he's had a really split season. So I guess looking at like the good parts, the first 5 games, maybe there's some potential there when he has, Shepard and Galladay and Tony, which is not like anything really great to talk about right now. But I think that's just the reason I was a little bit more optimistic. That's kind of where I was getting at.
I would just look at, like, from my perspective with Daniel Jones, like, he played Denver, Washington, Atlanta, New Orleans. All pretty bad defenses going into those games. Now that we know kind of what they are. He had a great game against New Orleans. We know he had 400 yards passing, which is absurd. And then, he's playing some good defenses. We've seen some interceptions. We've seen some issues. I think he'll make it, but I think they're going to get maybe some coaches changes there. So now he's going to deal with that. I do think there's a lack of talent at that position, so he's going to find a role. So I could see them kind of rolling it back with him again. But that's why I would put Mac Jones second, just because I think Mac Jones is a safer for dynasty perspective. Like, I think he's going to be there. I don't, like you said, I think he's a QB2. Like, I think he's a QB 14 to 18 consistent, and he'll have some games where he throws 3 touchdowns, and then he'll get in that top one. So I give me Mac there. So 2 of Mac. And then, gosh, both these guys – Zach Wilson's been very, very bad this season. So to me, it's interchangeable between Daniel and Zach. I'd put Daniel a little ahead of Zach because at least he's done it and he scored some fantasy points. He's had some numbers where you saw this year. And I would still say Zach is last out of this group, but I don't hate Zach as much as like some people do. And I do think that he can bounce back. I think they rushed him in. There's a reason why, like, he was my QB5 coming into the season and on my rankings, and you can go fact check me if you like, but he was someone that I knew was going to take some time, and they rushed it and they threw him in there. And I think that was kind of bad for all the parties involved. And I think they're starting to realize that now. He needed a little bit more time there. So I'd put him last, but I still have faith in him. I have a little bit more faith in him and Jones. I can't put him ahead of Jones right now just based on fantasy production.
And I'd say all 4 guys, and I know you and I like Tua a lot, but if you are in let's say a dynasty startup for a Superflex league, these, like you mentioned, are probably your QB2s, potentially your third guy if you want to draft guys maybe early for the position. I don't think any of these guys you're comfortable. Hey, this is my number one quarterback on my Superflex Dynasty team, and my second guy is somebody else. So I think that kind of groups them in that kind of not the same tier necessarily, but we're not saying that they're in the same kind of grouping as a Dak or a Herbert or one of those guys. But yeah, it's interesting, especially this is kind of hard too because all of these guys. I mean, maybe not Daniel Jones. You could probably give him the most stick on this, but all of these guys, we've just seen such an iffy support system around them and just so many moving pieces. And we're kind of looking to see what happens in the future with what's built around them. I mean, the Patriots are going to need a receiving core eventually. They got a good tight end and another guy that people wanted to be a good tight end. And then, Wilson's got some other guys that are probably not going to be around in the future. So we'll see what's built around them. But we've seen in the past where these young quarterbacks come in and the support system that's built as far as the guys that are blocking for them and the guys that are catching the ball just never get really upgraded. We saw with Sam Darnold with the Jets.
I think that's a fair point. I think that's a good point there. I'm sad because I have Mac Jones and Zach Wilson as my two quarterbacks in a dynasty league. And I'm hoping that they can turn it around a little bit, especially Wilson. I was hoping Wilson could be that QB1 with the upside. Jones, and I punted QB, and now I'm getting a little worried about that. My quarterbacks, I'm a little shaky there, but I think if Tua is your QB2 in leagues, though, I think you're fine. I think Tua has the longest lasting there.
I do too, and a lot of people have been real tough on Tua, but I still have the hope. I still have the hope. Let's go to another quarterback. We'll have to kind of shift around this question a little bit, but I think we can get something out of it. But at Triple Play Fantasy, I've heard of them before. I think you have too. How much fab, so free agent acquisition budget, so what you bid on guys for waivers, would you consider using on PJ Walker in 2 quarterback leagues? So again, leagues that you can start 2 quarterbacks. So let's just say, I mean, we're past the fab point. So let's just say, are you into streaming him while he's the starter? Because it looks like Sam Darnold might be out for a few weeks as news broke. PJ Walker, the ex XFL star, he was in the XFL and was good there. ESPN lists him as PJ, Sleeper lists him as Philip Walker, so we got a little bit of a discrepancy there for the name. But I'll jump in. Here. He's going to start. He's had 1 start last year versus the mighty Detroit Lions, and he scored 11.12 fantasy points. If it's this is a 2 quarterback league that they're asking about. I think it just depends on what your roster is looking like. I would have no intent on taking him to play him. I would have an intent on taking him so my opponent can't play him. So if I'm looking and the person I'm playing doesn't have a second quarterback, one of his quarterbacks is Tua, or one of his quarterbacks is Sam Darnold, and now he doesn't have one. At the time, I might have played that block game where I'm just going to go and grab him so that somebody else can't. But as far as going and grabbing him off of waivers and plugging him in and playing him, I don't have any confidence because personally, I don't have a lot of feet in the game to say anything about talent or anything like that, but I don't think he's very good. And I think that with these games coming up, he's playing the Arizona Cardinals, and we've seen the Cardinals in the past get to the quarterback and really put a lot of pressure on and get a lot of sacks. And their defense is actually looking pretty decent this year. I don't want to play him this week, but my whole intention of grabbing him would be so that somebody else can't. And that's kind of a addicting to do at times, but that's kind of the fantasy player I am. But what's your thoughts on PJ on ESPN and Philip on Sleeper Walker?
Yeah, listen, he played the Giants. He got into that game. He was 3 for 14. He had 21% completion percentage, 33 yards. He did not look great. Took a lot of sacks. And like you said, I think this Arizona defense is going to get after him a little bit. I think I wouldn't start him. I wouldn't have wasted any fab on him either, unless I absolutely needed a quarterback. Darnold was the guy, or whatever. I know he's on a lot of rosters already. When I was going through, I looked. But I realistically, I don't know how happy I'd be to do this. I don't know. I think they brought Matt Barkley back. I think Barkley's backing up Walker now. I think I think I saw that or whatever. Realistically, if Walker struggles, who knows what's going to happen here? I think you're hoping that he gets a rushing touchdown. I mean, he crushed in the XFL. Listen, I love the XFL. I was watching that. It was fun to watch. He was killing those dudes, but a lot of those dudes were not very good football players. So I think people remember that and remember how good he was, because I do. I thought he was a lot of fun to watch. And then you got to be, I think that they're going to lean heavy on the rushing attack. You're going to see a lot of CMC, a lot of Hubbard, and you're going to do that, and you're going to hope for a touchdown. But I have no confidence. I think it's just too much of a risk.
It looks like unless you said Barkley, unless that Barkley signing just happened, it looks like the other guy's James Morgan. So unless maybe Barkley just got signed.
I think Barkley maybe started the year. Maybe I could have been wrong. I don't know. I don't know who the third string quarterback.
Would you rather have PJ Walker, or would you rather have Simeon?
Simeon. I'd take Simeon.
I mean, and I think both guys were available in super flex leagues to be bid on, and I'm taking Simeon without thinking twice, because I think he's a better quarterback that's going to be able to push the ball a little bit and probably have a better completion percentage. Maybe not be great in mobile and things like that, but I'm not playing. I'm not touching PJ Walker at all. Funny thing was, I think 2 years ago, and I won't say the Twitter at or anything like that, but some guy was saying that PJ Walker was going to beat out Teddy Bridgewater for the job, and my brother Anthony went on there and he's like, no, he's not very good, and blah blah blah. And the guy ended up like he had a lot more followers than I did at the time, but he ended up unfollowing Anthony, who said this, and then he went unfollowed me too, because he was so mad that PJ Walker was not good according to Anthony. But I kind of agree with him. But that's fantasy Twitter for you, I guess. But yeah, we can move on.
Your brother getting you in trouble, your brother always getting you in trouble.
I mean, if some guys unfollow me because somebody said PJ Walker is not good at football, then I think that there's probably bigger issues at hand for that guy. But yeah, I don't really care for Anthony anyways in general. But next one's at T Carter 1383. He goes, of the players declared out for the season with injuries, who are your top 3 targets in Dynasty for a team in rebuild? So this has been a really, really injury-plagued season. As far as running backs go, we've seen a lot of guys get hurt. We saw, Derrick Henry should be out for the fantasy season. Cam Akers was out with the Achilles. J.K. Dobbins, the ACL. Raheem Mostert was hurt. Gus Edwards. I'm probably missing some guys, but as far as like season-ending injuries, a lot of running backs out, and there's some other players as well. Let's just pick one. Who's somebody that comes to mind? You're in a rebuild. You're trying to up your game for the future versus right now you're not really doing well in fantasy. Who's a good target right now?
Yeah, so I actually wrote a whole article for this Fantasy Pros on this yesterday. I picked 3 guys, but I kind of talked about these 3 guys going after rebuild, but I'll just take one since you're the boss of this show. And my guy is Cam Akers. So I think that a relative of the other guys that I mentioned, Cam is the cheapest, and like deals that he's going for right now, he got traded for Kadarius Toney straight up. And depending on what you think of Toney, like we were talking about that on the show yesterday, and I don't know about Toney. Like he had what is Toney? The big breakout game that he had when no one else was there, or is he what we see previously with that, like kind of how he struggled, or is he somewhere in the middle? So realistically, would you give him up for a running back like Akers if you believe in the talent? I mean, you're not really losing value, I don't think. I mean, you could probably get something a little extra if you really wanted to. So I don't mind that deal. And he also, Cam Akers got traded for Khalil Herbert and Van Jefferson. That's disgusting. If you can get Cam Akers for that, I'll do that all day, because it's too much ceiling, too much upside. Like that's people reading Twitter and seeing Khalil Herbert, they think he's really good, and David Montgomery comes back and they realize, like, where's the volume going to go on the carry? So I think that Cam Akers, and the guy that you got to understand, like everybody uses Marlon Mack as an example for Cam Akers for his Achilles, which is fine, but that's kind of tiresome. And let's be a little bit more creative here. Kene Nwangwu from Minnesota, which I wrote about at the beginning of the year this year, he tore his Achilles at Iowa State. So he suffered a torn Achilles there. And he shows promise. He just returned a touchdown back, and he's young, just like Akers. He's in that same kind of category of an athlete. So, if Nwangwu can come back and do that thing, now can Akers? I think there's a risk, but I think that he's worth the risk because I think his price is so low, you can grab him right now.
And I like that point because I did not think about him at all. And we just saw him. You have to say his last name because you're better at this than me.
Nwangwu?
Yes. I was watching Red Zone return that kick return, and the interesting thing about him was that, in this last draft class, I was asking myself, like, why did the Vikings, spend some draft capital, not early like a first round pick, but he wasn't like an 8th round pick or 7th round pick or whatever the case is. But they spent it on him, and he's very explosive, right? He's good at his craft, and knowing that he tore his Achilles, I think that should give you some optimism for Cam Akers. Probably two very different guys, but seeing some young guys bounce back and be effective on the NFL field and explosive and get after it is a good sign. Cam Akers, you see a lot of videos too of him putting in a lot of work right now. He's going through a lot of motion drills, and it looks like he's on a good path. So, a lot of people also like Henderson, but I don't think he's their franchise running back. No. Henderson seems to get banged up like every single game. I was listening to the fantasy footballers, and they said that he's usually good for like the first half, and then for some reason Sony Michel has to play too much because Henderson's banged up the last like few games or something like that. Cam Akers interesting though. I think I wrote him down, and I wrote down J.K. Dobbins. We saw a lot of guys come back from ACL tears, and he did it before the season started. There's been decent games out of Freeman and Latavius Murray and Tyson Williams this year. What do they all have in common? They're not part of the long-term plan. Gus Bus is Gus Edwards, but Gus tore his ACL, right? I'm pretty sure same injury later. ACL. He did it later, though, than J.K. Dobbins. So, I mean, his timeline for that return to injury is going to be later than Dobbins, and I think Dobbins is a guy that's going to come back, and we've seen in the past, we're waiting on Barkley to be 100% back, but the issue with him was not the ACL, it was the ankle. I mean, it was a different injury. Dalvin Cook's a guy that tore his ACL, came back, and he's been one of the best running backs in fantasy while healthy as well. So I think J.K. Dobbins coming back to a very good offense that wants to run the ball and has a bunch of old guys right now and some other guys we never heard of before the season. I think he's a good target because I think once he's back, once he's healthy, he's going to be back to being that number one. And if Gus Edwards also comes back, it's going to be a later timeline, but I think that this team knows that Dobbins is their guy. And I think it kind of shows for the fact that they had to go and grab Devonta Freeman, had to go and grab Latavius Murray and Lev Bell, all these older running backs to all get the job done with their split touches. So I like J.K. Dobbins.
I wrote about J.K. Dobbins too, so that was a good call. Like I did mention him, and just for perspective of what he's going for, and you tell me if you would do this, Ezekiel Elliott for Dobbins in a second. I'd probably do that if I'm rebuilding.
Rebuilding, yeah. If you're rebuilding, that's interesting.
I think realistically, I think Zeke's still got 2 years, and so if you are contending, it's not like you're losing Dobbins and like, oh, I'm going to be, fall off the cliff. I think Zeke's still going to be there. If you can get anything back with him, I think that's there. So I like that. And like you mentioned, like, I think he carries less risk than like a guy like Akers, but he's going to carry a higher price. So it depends on kind of where you want to build your team and how you build it. And I do think that. And the other guy I mentioned, I'll just say it real quick, is Calvin Ridley. I think realistically, Ridley's a good buy right now.
I think so too. I'm hoping he comes back, and I don't. Yes. I was thinking about that the other day. Like, what does that look like when he comes back? Like, does he, just say, declare like, hey, I want to be back. I'm going to come back to practice, and does he just play that week? I don't know what that looks like for the protocol because he's talented. I mean, he knows the playbook. He's a really good player, but when you miss extended time and you say you're back, does being back mean he's back that Sunday or is he back in 2 weeks? But Calvin Ridley's another guy because if you believed in the talent before, there's a lot of people that will sell him for peanuts right now because they're in that pinch. They're 500 or close to 500 in their fantasy league, and they want to get that extra edge to push.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was going to say his value's all over the place. Like, he went straight up for these guys this last 2 weeks. Amari Cooper, which I think is a pretty heavy price. It depends on where you're at. Rashad Bateman, Mike Williams last week, and then we see Mike Williams kind of drop up a little bit. Tyler Lockett, and in this one I couldn't believe he went straight up for a 2022 second.
Okay, yeah. That says enough right there.
It's ridiculous.
That's an unreal smash. Here's another thing too that you can do in keeper leagues. A lot of keeper leagues, Cam Akers and J.K. Dobbins and some other guys might have been dropped. If you are a team that, finds themselves getting closer and closer to playoffs and you're just not making the cut, a lot of these guys were dropped. They're not being held in keeper leagues because some keeper leagues you only keep 3 guys. So I know that I'm in one right now in a home league, and both Cam Akers and J.K. Dobbins are sitting on the waiver wire. So if you have some optimism for Dobbins or Akers and you want him to be your last keeper, you can drop guys and pick them up at the end of the season before you don't make playoffs if you are in that position. Yeah. So that's another thing to consider. It's something I might do if I don't make playoffs in this one league. Shifting over, my buddy Jeremy at Hey Mr. Holman, great guy. Do you think the past 2 weeks for Elijah Moore are a sign of things to come for the rest of the season or a product of Corey Davis being out, which has been a big narrative? There's been a lot of – this has been interesting because before the season, that was my guy. I mean, every single rookie draft, I went out and got Elijah Moore. Like, I was so high on Elijah Moore. And I know that Corey Davis is a factor. The quarterback play is a factor, too, because he's had his best games without his starting quarterback. The one thing I thought that was interesting was that he did have targets early on in the season. Weeks 2 and 3, he had 8 and 6 targets. I looked on Player Profiler before I went on a different show too, and through 6 games played, I'm pretty sure that he had a 40% of his targets were deemed as not catchable, which are like, well, 40% is not the biggest number. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. They were pretty much saying that only 60% of his targets that were thrown to him were actually catchable. So the targets were actually there. The ability to catch the ball was there from the talent. The ball was not getting to him, though. So that was interesting to look at. 20 total targets the last 3 games. The difference now is that he caught 6 for 6 and then 7 for 8. So the efficiency was definitely there. And then he had that 2-touchdown game as well. You know, the guy handled nothing but volume at Ole Miss in his last season there. He only had 1 game in I think it was 8 games that he played at Ole Miss that he didn't catch 10-plus passes. So he was going out there on a weekly basis for Ole Miss and catching 10-plus passes. So he can handle the volume. My thing is Corey Davis going to be a factor? I do think so. Will the quarterback situation be a factor? I do think so. I definitely think, though, that he needs in redraft to be rostered, and he was a big waiver wire guy. I don't want to play him against Baltimore this week, but after Baltimore is Miami, Houston, and Philly. These are games that I'll be interested to potentially plug him into a flex. I think, maybe depending on my roster, but curious to hear about you. Are you a little bit more skeptical about Elijah Moore rest of the season?
Well, I know you like Elijah a lot. I don't know if I'm skeptical because I don't necessarily think so when you look at what he's been able to do this year, last week in the Colts, we talked about it. Season high in targets, receptions. He had his touchdowns. He had a 6% snap. When Davis comes back, and I think it's going to come back this week, he's going to push Denzel Mims and Cole, I think, down the depth chart. And the Jets probably would move more opposite of Davis and use Jamison Crowder probably in the slot because Moore can play on the outside. I think that's one realistic thing that can happen. And if you do that, then they're going to go 11 personnel. The Jets run 3 receiver sets 60% of the time. So even if Moore gets limited a little bit to that, he's going to have opportunities, right? So when you're looking at what the Jets are able to run, I think he's there. I'm with you, though. I don't know if he's a smash start. I think it kind of just depends on it's just going to be turning on your roster and where you're at. But I do think that he has the ability to take over as that wide receiver 2 in that offense in terms of – he realistically could be wide receiver 1 in that offense. But I think, your ceiling you're looking at as a wide receiver 2 – and, depending on how you're at, I take that. And I think you probably, I think people picked him up 10 to 25% of their fab, which is okay. I think that's all right if you're in a redraft league. But I do think the matchup's less than ideal this week, but I don't think it's going to be as big a hit as you think. And if you have to start him, I think realistically he's going to get the targets. I can see him getting 6 targets, maybe breaks 1, he scores a touchdown.
Yeah, I'd say rest of season. I'd be surprised if he ever is under 5 targets. I think that the rest of the season he's going to be somewhere along that 6-7 target range, depending on the game. But might be matchup dependent a little bit. But as far as a flex play with the bye weeks, with the injuries, we saw the ceiling already. Some other players in the league, we have high hopes for, and we haven't seen the ceiling. We saw the ceiling last week. Is he going to score 2 touchdowns ever again this season? Who knows? But at the same time, does he have the ability to have a ton of yards and a ton of catches and score? He does. So at least we know the ceiling is pretty high. I think a quarterback play, like we said, might be a factor. But love Elijah Moore. Love Elijah Moore. At FFB Victoria, worried about AB injury. Try to trade. Antonio Brown, she's referring to. He had the ankle sprain and he was in a walking boot. I think the last report came out that I don't think he's hitting IR, is he? I don't think so.
I didn't see anything about IR yet.
No. But he's had 3 games of 23 plus fantasy points this season. He's had a season high of 31.4 fantasy points. He's had games where he's had 11 and 13 targets, even with Mike Williams and Chris Godwin in that mix. The name values there. What do we think here about Antonio Brown? Maybe we're more redraft focused here.
Yeah, I mean, if you're redraft focused, I think that if a trade was out there to grab, I think you might think about it. But in this offense, when he comes back, those targets are too good to pass up, right? So, I mean, like you said, well, Godwin and Evans was out there. I think you said Mike Williams, but it's Mike Evans. Just I want to clear that up.
So man, yeah.
Nick knows what he's talking about. He just, it happens.
I just throw out Mike sometimes and hope that they hit.
Yeah, but I mean, realistically, I think you keep him because I don't think anybody's going to trade for him. So you just hold off and you hope that he comes back and gets those targets that you like to see. And I think he can because you know what? Brady goes to him. So when he's out there, he's healthy. That's fine. I mean, realistically, you should have spots for him and you're going to be okay on your team. You don't need to drop him. So unless you could get someone for him, but who are you going to get? Like, that's kind of my biggest question mark about, in redraft, who could you maybe go target? I don't know. Like, I think I saw him in one of my leagues, in redraft leagues. He went for J.D. McKissick. That's, I guess I could see it from both ends, but I think I just hold on to Antonio Brown because of ceiling.
Yeah, I think so too. I wouldn't take McKissick personally. The only game he didn't have good targets was Atlanta. I think he got hurt that game because he didn't play the next week. Every single game he's had very, very good targets on a weekly basis. So that means that he's an automatic flex play when he's healthy on a weekly basis for a good offense from, I think Brady was QB1 so far this season. I think I could be wrong. I think Brady's QB1 right now. So Brady's having a great year. He's a great option. So the one way I would trade him would be if that, you're in a deal and you're really pushing for a bigger name guy and you need that final piece to push the trade. So let's say you're gunning for like a DK Metcalf or something. I had a DK Metcalf trade today in my league. If you're like pushing for a guy like that and you're like pretty close, you have a decent running back, and then you can add Antonio Brown to really push the trade because of the name value and people are looking at the stat sheet that we just talked about, then maybe I'd trade him. But otherwise, I think you just hold him on your bench right now just because, you look at the waiver wire, you're not going to get a better guy when he's healthy. If you just look at the regular, redraft leagues. But yeah. At Herms NFL, I need some clarity about whether or not Tony is a hold in redraft. Kevin, you mentioned him before. It's tough because you look at guys like Allen Robinson. I talked about him on a show yesterday. Allen Robinson never scored 11 fantasy points. Never. He's never scored 11 fantasy points this season. But, Kadarius Toney, we saw 13.9 and 29.6. Was, like you said, was it the product of him being like the only guy who had, air coming out of his lungs running around the field at the time? Could have been that. But the last 2 games, he scored 7.36 at 1.7 fantasy points. He had that hand laceration 2 weeks ago, and then the Giants only threw the ball 20 total times the next week. So there was some other outside factors that had to do with it. For me, just because of most redraft leagues not being super deep, I probably just hold on to him for now. And kind of see how things go. That'd be my take, because I feel like if you drop them to the waivers, unless you're picking up like a guy like I spoke a lot about Rashad Bateman this week, and Rashad Bateman was a waiver wire pickup. If you're going to pick up Rashad Bateman, I'm fine with it. But if you're going to go and pick up like Russell Gage or something, I mean, you can throw out some of these other names, Marquez Callaway. Then maybe you're holding him. But he's 50.3% rostered right now. So it seems like people have been on that boat of dropping him, because I'm pretty sure like 2 weeks ago, he's probably around that 65% range. But what are you doing with him? Are you holding him? Are you getting rid of him? Or, I mean, I don't know.
I mean, it depends on who's out there. So, like, if Ayuk is still out there for some reason, obviously I'm going to drop him for Ayuk. If Michael Gallup is out there, he's coming back after he's been injured since week 1, obviously. I know Cedric Wilson has kind of been there, but you know what? Gallup is there and a better offense, a better quarterback. We're not going to talk about last week. But, yeah, I mean, maybe you drop him for Gallup. Probably not yet, but you want to see Elijah. I mean, would you rather have Elijah or Tony?
I would rather have Elijah Moore.
Yeah. I mean, Elijah's out there, right? When we're looking at roster percentages and where they're at, like you said, Bateman. And I think when you start getting down there, it's like, okay, after that, yeah, once you hit like the Tim Patrick, Russell Gage area, even Van Jefferson, I think I'd rather have Tony there. But two guys that I think that are in that tier is if you believe in Donovan Peoples-Jones, if you believe in maybe what he can do with OBJ being gone, and in Darnell Mooney, you saw him last week. I mean, that I think is his tier right now. I think he's a little above that. If those guys are out there, you might want to consider it. But I do think that Tony has an incredible ceiling, but he's got to get the targets and he's got to get the opportunity. He's been hurt. He's had some questionable stuff going on. Like, he's got to get in there. But I think it just all depends on roster dependency. But if those guys are there, Bateman or Moore, Gallup, or Ayuk are there, I'm probably going to drop them and grab those guys instead of Tony.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, what we are both saying is it depends on who's available. If you're going to drop them for somebody that will definitely make your team better. We gave you a handful of names there. Mooney's interesting that you mentioned. Seeing that last game, I probably might be pushing towards Mooney. I don't know. He looked really good in that last game. Donovan Peoples-Jones, last game only had 3 targets, and he made that like 60-yard receiving touchdown, but he also just came, off of a week where he had that groin injury. And now that Jarvis Landry is also banged up, OBJ is gone off in the wind right now. He's another interesting guy too. So a lot of things to consider when kind of making that, wide receiver 5 decision on your team for redraft. Got the next one here at T King Mode. Which low owned or waiver wire running back is most interesting to you rest of season? So our guy Troy King asking about running backs rest of season that might be low owned or under rostered right now. I got a couple guys that I won't dive too deep into, but I'll let you go first because maybe you'll hit on one of these guys.
Yeah, I'll just mention 2. I think I actually think Eno Benjamin is a sneaky play for the Cardinals. I like Eno, and Edmonds is expected. I think he's going to miss 4 to 6 weeks. So someone's going to play behind Connor. Connor's not going to get that full load. I think they're going to kind of rely on him. And you know what? Benjamin was a very good running back at Arizona State. And he is a solid runner in between the tackles. And I think he's going to get some usage. And so I think he's super cheap right now. You can go grab him in a lot of your leagues. Him. And I also think, I guess, Jordan Howard. I don't know how many roster's under 40% right now. If he's going to get these carries, I mean, he's going to score touchdowns. I think you have to consider adding him.
And, I mentioned yesterday, I think he caught like 40 or 41 balls in his last season at Arizona State. So they used him in the passing game, and that's what Chase Edmonds' biggest perk was in his game. So he can do it. So that's an interesting one. I never liked A.J. Dillon, in all honesty, but he's had 3 flex-worthy weeks, 16 and 12 touches the last 2 games. He's over 50% rostered, but he's getting the ball a decent amount, but it's kind of a dart throw. If he does get the touches, he does pretty decent with it. But again, you're kind of banking on second running back there. Do you have any faith in Devonta Freeman?
I mean, some people do out there. I think our boy Troy does. I don't know, man. I haven't seen Devonta play in a couple years now. Feels like I don't know. I don't know what he's got in the tank. I think he's just like Adrian Peterson. If he scores a touchdown, you're happy if you have to play him. And if he doesn't score a touchdown, he's going to get you 4.5 points.
Yeah, 11.2, 12.9, and 16.3 the last 3 games. But he did, like you said, he scored in all 3 of those games. So that's a flex play potentially if you really need it. Do you like Ramondre Stevenson?
Yes, I do. I think that
yeah.
But he didn't play. He didn't practice it for concussion, so he's out again, and so is Harris. So fire a Bolden, baby.
I guess I was like not hoping. You don't want to hope or anything, but I was hoping that if one guy was going to be available, that wasn't Harris, it was going to be him. He's had a 15.2 and a 12.6 outing this season. 10 for 62 last game. He actually looked pretty good. So he's another guy. A lot of people are still hanging on what Jeff Wilson did last season. But if Elijah Mitchell continues to play well, I don't know what that's going to look like. it's just a lot of dart throws, and it all comes down to opportunity and touches at the end of the day. For that. This one's probably pretty quick, but we'll go on something non-fantasy here. So you can go first here, but at Toronto FF8, that's Dave asks, favorite part about being a dad, specifically, like an example. Do you have anything that stands out about that we were just talking about? We were just talking about stuff before the podcast. It wasn't the brightest of things, but we were kind of relating on some of the ups and downs before. Obviously, we love being dads. That's something we have in common. We talk about often, but there's a lot of new dads out there too. So what's something that stands out, Kevin?
Like I'll do something very specific to what I'm doing the next couple of days. So I have next 2 days off from school because I'm a teacher, and so we get a holiday tomorrow. On Friday we have off too, and so I'm just taking each one of them on a date. And so I'm taking one of my daughters that doesn't have school tomorrow on a breakfast date. So we're going to go to breakfast. And then my other daughter, we're going to go to a lunch because she wants to go to a lunch date. She told me. And I've done that. I do that all the time with them. And we just go spend some time with each other. And we just talk and we talk about things. And I think that is just spending time with them, doing things that I love, like going golfing. I took my daughter golfing the other day, going to games, going to sporting events. I think that's the funnest thing, is just kind of indoctrinated into my loves of sports and stuff, and seeing them love it too, and just enjoying time with them. It's really about time to me. I didn't have a dad growing up, so it was one of those things where I was raised by a single parent, and so I want to make sure that they have a father figure in their lives that they can kind of look up to.
And I'm sure and I see pictures and videos and things all the time, them in the jerseys. I thought that was the coolest shit ever. Little things like that of them feeling involved with things that you're passionate about and being there with you for things that you enjoy. I think they'll really appreciate as they get older. And mine's a little bit younger, only 16 months, but just the little thing, just the face lighting up, just coming home and chasing her around. I posted a video on Twitter of me popping out from a corner, and she's just belly laughing, and I'm chasing her and tackling her, and she's cracking up. So I think just the face lighting up when they see you, and just the little things, jumping on the bed as she's getting changed by her mom, and she's dying laughing, and she's looking for me to do something crazy all the time. It's just the little things all the time, really go a long way. So I think just at the end of the day, just being a big piece of their everyday life is just a lot, just a lot. Back to fantasy. Good question though. We'll end on this one. Decent question, because two guys from the same school. At Dynasty_sports with a Z. He asks, Waddle or Judy in Dynasty PPR. So one guy is a rookie this season in Waddle. Judy was a rookie last season. Let's look at what the rankings say for the two of them. So Fantasy Pros has Waddle is the wide receiver 26 for Dynasty. Jerry Jeudy is the wide receiver 18 for Dynasty. Fantasy Points has Waddle as the wide receiver 26 as well for Dynasty. And then Jerry Jeudy is the wide receiver 22 for Dynasty. Who do you prefer for Dynasty leagues? So this is a good question. If you're in a startup next season and you're looking at Waddle or Jeudy?
Yeah, I know you love Jeudy. I know where you're going to go in this category, and I love Waddle a lot. So I'm gonna go with Waddle, and it's probably Jeudy if you're smart. But I think the thing that kind of makes me go towards Waddle a little bit is I think Waddle can be the wide receiver one option on his team, and he's going to get more targets, and he can have that with Tua. And I think that their quarterback situation is Tua, so that's my belief in Tua. And on the flip side, Judy's going to compete with Sutton, Fant, these other guys in that offense, Devonta, those other dudes. And then we need to have it. Does he have a quarterback? Do they have a legitimate quarterback option back there? It's not going to be Bridgewater next year. I know they just beat Dallas, but that was a weird game. I don't see it being that. So I think there's a lot more question marks on the Jeudy side. I think Waddle realistically could be a wide receiver one option on that team. And going forward, he's going to have a little bit higher ceiling just based on the talent around him. And I know they could add guys, but they'd use high draft capital on him. So I don't think that, I mean, he's a top 10 pick. So I think that he has the draft capital. He has the ability, the big play ability, all that. So I'm going to lean Waddle, but I understand you're going to pick Judy. So I just want to be opposite too.
I will say though, that I was like, this is one of my whiffs. I never said that, Jalen Waddle was going to be a bust or anything like that. I just really wasn't interested. I felt like the volume, and I don't have his college stats, but I felt like, he had the big play, but he seemed like he was banged up here and there. And I don't know if he was dependent on the big play. I don't know if he was a big target guy in general because he's had these other guys in the same system as him. But I will say that he's very impressive this season. He's currently wide receiver 23, I think. Yeah, wide receiver 23. And he's had some really nice games of, 16-ish range twice, 15-ish range, 17.8, 29 fantasy points. So I do agree with you a lot on the fact that I feel like what will be known for him will stay constant for the next handful of years, because I don't think that Tua is not going to be the starting quarterback next year or the year after. I think Tua is there to stay, and I think that being tied to Tua is a good thing. As far as Jerry Jeudy goes with the Broncos, I don't know what long-term what it's going to look like. Teddy's been pretty decent in games this year. Are they invested in him for the next 5 years? I wouldn't say that. I don't think so. And it's not Drew Lock. We know that, because if it was, he'd be playing right now. They'd be getting him in there. But I think I just, I've been a huge Jerry Jeudy fan. I had him as my wide receiver one out of that class. I think he's just phenomenal with dealing with targets and getting open. And I think he can make, plays all over the field. I think just talent-wise, I just have a separation between the two. But I really do get the constant, he's tied to this quarterback, and what's Jerry Jeudy going to be? I do think Jerry Jeudy long-term is the wide receiver one in Denver. And, all the people that, said it was the opposite, it doesn't look like that. And I think a lot of people have been quiet lately, because the past 2 weeks, Jerry Jeudy's the one. He's the one. A lot of people wanted Cortland Sutton to be the one, and Cortland Sutton is a good player. He's a very good player. He's not the one. Jerry Jeudy's the one. But I'll take Jeudy. I'd say they're close. I mean, fantasy points and pros had them right around, I don't know, under 10 spots away from each other, but around that, 18 to 25-ish range. I'd probably be a little bit higher on Jerry Jeudy, but I think Waddle's been one of the players in fantasy that has grown the most for me. I think also with Miami, seeing Mike Gesicki up his game, I think is a good thing too, because I think that more completes the team versus, having to go out and seek more wide receivers to make this team complete. I think they'll have to address the running back position before they have to keep adding more and more pass catchers. But yeah, I like the mailbag questions at the end of the day. Like I said before, a lot of different topics: redraft, dynasty, personal things, and something to mix up the weekly episodes with. But good show. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you stuck with us live, I know we actually had a decent amount watching us live. Can't see it on StreamYard still, but I
Come
go
on
on
StreamYard.
Twitter. I know. You can't see it. It says 0, but then I went on Twitter and it said the actual amount of people, and it was actually an okay number for a while. Kevin, what's coming up for you the rest of the week before we hit the weekend?
I'm going to sleep. That's what's coming up with me. But no, other than that, I'm just going to be hanging out. Obviously you can find myself at Fantasy Bros, and just enjoying the 4-day weekend with my kids. So that's what I'm going to be doing. That's good. It'll be much needed. I'm sure they'll really appreciate that too. It's going to be a good refresher for sure. Yeah. For sure. I'll be on another show tomorrow with my guy Tyler. It's the most I've done in a week in a long time. I went every day so far this week, and then I'll be live again on Sunday with Fantasy Points, looking at some player props as well. And then on Sunday, no Bears. I think we needed a little bit of a break after we got shafted in that game a little bit, but excited for week 10. So good luck with your guys' fantasy matchups, your home team games as well, and have a good rest of your guys' week.